Welcome to another episode of the Build a Mind podcast. I am excited about this one because we get to have a conversation with a really cool meetup organizer named Jack. So I'm here with my co-host, Will. I'm your host, Trevor, and we got Jack with us today. So Jack Williams founded the Grand Rapids Bitcoin community, which offers gatherings, educational resources, workshops, and online discussions where individuals of all skill sets can collaborate and learn from each other. This initiative has expanded beyond Grand Rapids, fostering strong connections within the broader Michigan Bitcoin community and uniting people across the state. So Jack was an engineer, and as an engineer, he helped to design and develop systems that function effectively and efficiently. And naturally, as the case is with most engineers, Bitcoin kind of finds you. So he understands the influence that Bitcoin has on other aspects of life, health, and well-being. This has led him to explore sustainable practices such as permaculture, focusing on self-sufficiency through growing and raising their own food. So having lived a nomadic life for several years, Jack recognizes the global significance of Bitcoin, particularly in countries that do not use the US dollar as their reserve currency. So he believes in individual moral responsibility given by God and advocates for decentralized governance structures where allegiance is to God rather than the state. And personally, I love that because it means that he takes personal responsibility for his life and doesn't obfuscate that responsibility to other people. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to have a really fun conversation today. Yeah, I'm excited about this one. Will, how are you feeling about it?
Feeling great. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it. We're going to bring Jack to the stage. Oh, shoot. Oh, man, I'm already having issues this morning. Can you guys hear me?
We hear you. Your video is frozen.
Are you able to bring Jack to the stage? Because my whole screen is frozen.
Yeah, Jack is on stage now.
Okay. What is up, Jack?
Hey, guys. How's it going?
It's good. It's good. So my whole screen is frozen up. We're having some technical difficulties, but we're going to roll through it. So welcome to the show, Jack. We're really happy to have you here. How are you doing today, man?
Yeah, doing well. It's a beautiful day in Michigan, and excited to be with you guys. Thank you.
Awesome. So my first question for you is, what is it like? How has it been your experience organizing these meetups, starting a meetup in the Grand Rapids area? What was that experience like, and how has it kind of shaped your view on Bitcoin and the greater sphere that is the ecosystem?
Yeah, so we were living in Germany back in 2022, my wife and I, and then we decided that we'd move over here back into the U.S., into my hometown in Grand Rapids. And over the past few years, previously, I had been diving deep into Bitcoin and was anxious to get to know my fellow Bitcoiners who were from, my community and start up that local relationship that I think is very necessary. I didn't really know what to expect, but that was basically the key aspect of what I was going for. So I was like, well, what a better way than to start a meetup and then we can start to, connect with people. And so starting that was great, real easy. You basically just put the word out there and then people come to you. All you basically have to do is set up a time and a location, and then people, flood in, and there's sometimes a lot of times you see someone once, and then there's a lot of times where you get a recurring diehards that come month after month after month. And it's those diehard folks that are have turned from like just casual conversations monthly about Bitcoin to real close friends and resources that we can bounce things off of, particularly a lot of different things like knowledge. So there's one guy who's really good at networking, and I've asked him, and a lot of our other members have been able to come to him for anything, questions related to spinning up a node, or he's always tinkering with new applications and the latest and greatest wallet that's come out, and he's already figured everything out before you've even started to download the app. So it's a great place to find a lot of good resources. Everyone has their own thing to bring to the table, And you can find that through the internet as well. But having a dedicated time and place to make sure that you guys meet up and catch up on things, I think is a real valuable resource that any Bitcoiner would benefit from.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those real world encounters, meet space is very important for supporting Bitcoin adoption and education and just kind of building, meeting future business partners and just all the projects that can be done. But I want to back up for a second, Jack, if you don't mind sharing a bit more of your history, what took you to Germany in the first place? And you had already been aware of Bitcoin while living in Germany. So just kind of tell us that origin story, if you will.
Yeah, I thought about this the other day where you often get questioned. It was like, what was the beginning of your Bitcoin journey? And the more I answered that, the more I kind of realized like it's a bit tough to pinpoint. It was like when you bought your first Bitcoin, I think that's when a lot of people kind of determined that's when I got in, right? Because then you have actual skin in the game. Um, but I mean, for me, I think it was, back in like I was finishing up high school and there was the whole Ron Paul era. There was Liberty Reserve, which was an attempt at a centralized digital currency that was supposed to be inflation proof, right? And everything, and that got shut down. Soon after that, Bitcoin came out. And for me, particularly, I was like, okay, that's great. I would love to support this, but likely the founders are probably going to get jailed like the Liberty Reserve guys. And I don't see it actually panning out. But over time, this thing never dying, always hearing about it. It was probably around 2017 where I kind of decided, all right, let's get some skin in the game. I was going through a lot of life changes. I was working a normal fiat job. I didn't hate it, but I had an urge to go out there and kind of develop myself in other ways. So I ended up quitting that job and then just backpacking South America for a few months, which led me to New Zealand, which led me to meeting my wife there, my now wife. We started dating when we met in New Zealand, and she's from Germany. So after our New Zealand trip, I ran into a couple issues. I had a bad snowboard accident, and so we went our separate ways. I came back to the U.S. and she went to finish her university over in Germany. And then 2020 started coming around these rumors of this virus that was going to threaten us from shutting down borders and airports and everything started coming up around March. And I was like, man, if I'm going to be able to be with her again and see her again, I better get over to Germany. And so I ended up flying and landing there in March 10. I think lockdown started like the 14th or something like that, like a couple days later. And yeah, I was just kind of destitute in Germany without a visa or anything. We ended up working it out. But then, yeah, ended up staying in Europe for about 2 years, pretty much in lockdown the entire time. But that really allowed me the opportunity to, two things come together. The Federal Reserve starts printing an insane amount of new dollars, and you've got nothing to do but, either watch Netflix or you could take your time in diving deep and learning new skills or whatever. So I spent a lot of time just learning and educating myself on anything that I could with Bitcoin, writing articles on it, and just kind of exploring that space and doing a deep dive. And you could say I became a bit obsessed, and that never really went away.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. I struck by one thing in that story. It's like there's two kinds of people, or two ways that people handled the lockdown times, however long that was, depending on where people lived. One is kind of like what you did, you really leaned into education, trying to create new skills, trying to make the most of the situation, increasing value for yourself while, taking advantage of this time when the world had slowed down or shut down in many areas and there was really nothing left to do, maybe no work to be done for long periods of time. but you could still be productive in these ways. And that's, some people did choose that route like you did. And then the other way is people just, the negative side effects of a lockdown, they really, people may have chose or may have just passively allowed it to happen, just these negative effects of lockdowns washing over them and affecting them in these sad negative ways, getting out of shape, languishing in video games or in really less than useful online communities that didn't really grow their skills or didn't really enrich their lives. And so I'm just struck by how you took these risks and then of course made the most of that time.
Yeah, I think Bitcoiners kind of in general have that mentality, and maybe a Bitcoiner in that term might not be the appropriate, but there is a strive for bettering yourself and taking on that responsibility of your own life despite what external forces are imposing on you, right? And I think those type of minded people are also naturally more inclined to decide where they're going to keep their store of value, their wealth. And if you actually understand anything about Bitcoin, you realize this might be, even though everyone's saying that this may be risky or foolish or whatever, I know that based on the properties that this holds, it doesn't matter what other people's opinions of it are. I think that's going to do me well in the long run. And I think people who are more of that type of mindset end up gravitating to Bitcoin, and I guess could become more likely to become, right?
It's interesting because I think a lot of people graduated in that Bitcoin class of 2021, and kind of based on the experiences that you're talking about, I think a lot of times like there's a certain type of person that kind of comes to Bitcoin, just like you're talking about, the individual self-thinker, the ones who are curious about things, the DIYers. And I think back to my personal experience, it's like I didn't get into Bitcoin until about 2022. So lockdowns happened. I was that gamer. I was blowing my time away with just playing video games and not really looking into things. But I was curious about Bitcoin when I heard about it. And so I wouldn't say that I was a Bitcoiner, but I was kind of predisposed to become a Bitcoiner. And when I finally heard about Bitcoin, and then like Jack said, when you got skin in the game, you start doing more and more research. You start finding out like, what is this thing? How can it be taken away from us? How can it be the thing that we want it to be? And it started my general deep dive down the rabbit hole. And that happened in 22. But so I was a little bit late, but really every time like I go out into the world and I see somebody or I meet somebody who's, talking a certain way, I'm like, man, you're a Bitcoiner. Like, you don't even know it yet, but you are a Bitcoiner. And so, you try to like bring those touch points to them, and you see their journey start to happen. And it's really, really fun to watch because, it's a certain type of person that comes to Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin makes that person more well-rounded. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? How Bitcoin changes a person on a fundamental level.
Yeah, I think to just kind of expand on that, I think you see it a lot in taking care of yourself, in taking care of your family, and in taking care of your community. I think the type that we're talking about, not us, but like the normies, for lack of a better word, they're easily susceptible to what the news is telling them, and their kind of view is a lot more global. And in some ways, you need a global perspective, but in a lot of ways, your views are not your own at that point. Your views are just basically what is being told to you, that narrative that is being prescribed to you, and you're just kind of taking that on. But I think if you approach things with a much more individual approach, where it's like, if I'm passionate about changing the world and making the world a better place, I'm not able to unless I take care of myself first. If I'm bedridden and fat, lazy, have a disease of some kind, I'm not healthy, I'm not effective, I'm not a productive person in society, right? And then you can expand that on a little bit more to, okay, I'm responsible for my family. This is important for me to take care of, because now I'm helping to create the future generations who will help collectively make the world a better place. And then you can expand that to your community. But I think there's a hierarchy there, right? Where like you said in the intro, like your allegiance should be to God, then yourself, then your family, then your community. And this whole global governance structure that we have, we're being told constantly that this is where you need to pick a side, you need to be on this side, and this is a view that you need to have. And I think that's not only wrong, but it's just not helpful. It's not productive, and I don't think you get anywhere with that. 8 billion individual, powerful, um, effective people in the world who are working on themselves, I think can change the world. But a collective society where there's one story that you adhere to doesn't really make sense. So I think our people who think a little bit more like us on an individual basis start to address things like that, where their family values are strong. They're more inclined to be healthy and seek healthy behaviors, working out, choosing where they buy their food. Bitcoiners for some reason are a lot more susceptible to eating local meat and local produce versus tostados from the gas station, right? There's something, we have a bit more self-respect for us, and it's that low time preference where we're thinking on the longest terms possible instead of just this instantly gratifying dopamine kicks that I think a lot of average people are susceptible to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, it's disheartening sometimes. I personal story. We do a parade every single year for this festival in my town, and I'm in the I'm in the parade with my wife, who's we're walking dogs, and I'm walking down and I'm looking throughout the town, and I just see so many people who are unhealthy and not taking care of themselves, not thinking about their lives, not really having that low time preference. And to me, that's sad, because I think, generations back, you go back to like a type of person who really did like take care of themselves. The food was better, the education was better, the quality of living was so much better. And now we just look out our windows and it's nothing but sickness and disease, and people seem to be perfectly fine with it. And then, like you said, you get the Bitcoiners who are like, well, no, I'm going to go choose where I get my meat. I'm going to go choose where I get my vegetables. I'm going to choose specifically how my children are educated. And like, for me, that's what drew me into Bitcoin, was the idea that like all of a sudden I can choose how to live my life. And I don't want to live unhealthy. I don't want to live like that. I want to live a fun, like exciting, happy, healthy life. And Bitcoin is kind of like the catalyst that did that for me. And I think that a lot of other people resonate with that. So I don't know. I think that there is hope when you look out into the future of what Bitcoin can do for people, as long as we start putting that responsibility on ourselves and not on, oh, the government's going to fix it for us. Oh, like the state is going to give us the food that we need. They're going to give us the education that we need. And that's just my personal take on it. But yeah, I like what you said there, Jack. That was really, it's coming to my heart.
I go ahead, Jack.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think a lot of where that comes from is being sick of being let down. It's almost, I think the whole world is starting to kind of come to that conclusion. So, which is why we're getting more Bitcoiners, we're getting more critical thinkers, and I think I don't want to always blame the government. It could be the government. It could be basically just the systems that we find ourselves in, the food systems, the education systems. I think they're failing, and I think we're realizing that it's becoming evident. And this is just the result of a collapsing society, and that may seem doomeristic to say, but I think it's the reality. And what Bitcoiners tend to end up kind of playing this out, where they're like, okay, well, if this is beyond hope of repair, you got to do something. And so I think what we decide to do is adopt systems that are beneficial for us in the future. And if those systems aren't here yet, then what can we do to start creating them?
Yeah,
We're effectively the producers in society that you need, like
right.
all ingenuity is built off of the entrepreneur type, and I think that's us.
Yeah, it's interesting you said, like society seems to be collapsing. I mean, for a while it seemed to be deteriorating, but now it seems like something's accelerating with that, and you hear lots of, concerned people who are in, who are relatively successful, who have influence, talking about the same idea that it seems things are, you know, the decline has been going on for a while, and now there's like an impending collapse kind of, you know, feeling out there amongst a lot of people. And, what Bitcoin brings is, typically when I think cultures or societies are in that kind of decline phase or even like a collapse phase, there's this immense urge to like return to past norms when times were better. And with Bitcoin, it's kind of different. It's a positive outlook on the future, not trying to return to some past situation that was stable, more stable, but you embracing innovation, looking to the future to create a future that is more stable, and embracing new technologies that are enabling and supportive of human flourishing. And I think so many Bitcoiners pretty quickly, once they get past their doubts about Bitcoin and is it real and are we going to have another Liberty Reserve, situation, e-gold situation, once they get past that a little bit, then they're like, oh yeah, this is the thing that we can embrace that takes us into the future in a positive way. And so again, like you said, people all over the world are the first way a lot of them kind of start that embrace is by meeting in person with people and starting a meetup group, or at least some physical center where they can do educating, evangelism, and support adoption of this thing, because it's going to help take us into the future. And so I did that. I don't know, I've been around a long time. I've talked on the podcast. I've been in the space 11 years. And the way I got started was with a meetup, and I started supporting a bunch of other meetups after I got my meetup off the ground. And, that was just immensely rewarding. And back like 10, 11 years ago, we were doing it once a week, every same time, same place, once a week. And we would get, 30-ish people every week. A lot of regulars, but many new people every week. And that was just incredibly encouraging. And now, you get 30 people to a meetup, and that's still a good turnout, and we're 10 years on from when, myself and some other peers of mine putting meetups together, we're having those same numbers. And it's, it's just really encouraging, I think, for the people who see something like that come across their social feed and they're like, maybe I'll check that event out. I don't have anything going on that night. Looks some interesting people there. I, can meet some new folks, maybe some friends, maybe some potential business partners. And yeah, that's how we take our society into the future in a positive way when things seem to be crumbling around us.
The education aspect that I think is so important. And that's why I kind of feel a lot of us are called, where we need to be that resource, because what you said is really important. And I really noticed this in Germany. So there's this mindset that you mentioned where things aren't good right now. Let's go back to a time that we can trust because we've experienced it before and it's played itself out to be true. Let's go back to that. So an example of how Germany does that is, let's use windmill technology because the grid is unstable and now we're polluting the atmosphere and whatever. And this seems a lot more, what we've done in the past, and free just to go off of the weather. That's all great. What we're kind of pushing for is, hey, technology is going to advance. We're going to continue to build up a future that we can't see yet. And that's why I think a lot of people don't really understand it, because they have no reference point. They don't know what the future is going to look like. And we don't either. No one does. But we we do know that it's going to look like something that has never looked like it has in the past. And we trust that whatever we're building now is going to bring us into the future. And if we build it in the correct way, freedom focused, privacy focused, and helping the individual thrive rather than, going into a controlled, centralized, enslaved society. If we can do this right, where we bring liberty to all people, it will look very different, but it will look so much better. And we have a lot of faith that we're going into the right direction and that we're not going to exacerbate this impending collapse in this rough society that we're dealing with. And so I think there's a lot of that conflict happening right now, where people are kind of trying to pull in those two different directions, where it's like, let's advance us, but we trust that we're going to do it in a good way. More power is better, more energy is better, and it will help us. And we're not going to destroy the planet because we can do it in a responsible and clean way. I don't know if you guys are more into mining than I am, if you kind of see things that way.
Totally. I mean, you use the word build a lot. And so when things are kind of deteriorating, you can either repair them or you can build new things. And so when Bitcoin comes around in someone's consciousness or a group's consciousness locally, like a bunch of people attending a meetup, those are folks who are attracted to this thing for its promises for the future, potentially. And they want to get their hands dirty. They want to meet people and they want to build. And so how do you get involved as an individual? You can buy Bitcoin. You can engage with other like-minded people who are also interacting with Bitcoin. But it also has all these other ways that you can get your hands on, individually or as small groups and build. And, an obvious way is like a software project that utilizes Bitcoin. And that's a difficult thing to do. It requires usually capital investment, requires, people need to eat and feed their families. So if they're going to work and dedicate their time to those kinds of projects, they need to get paid. And early software projects and startups around Bitcoin or anywhere in tech, there usually requires a lot of sweat equity before you're getting paid. Or if you are getting paid, it's you're being underpaid because there's a future promise, right? But another way people can build and get involved in Bitcoin, and it's very obvious right away, like after the first or second questions are answered for them about what is Bitcoin and how does it help me, the next thing most people ask is, what is mining? And so when they get some of the answers about what is mining, they think, oh, well, anyone can really do this. I need certain hardware, but I can do it on my own, collaboratively with others, using mining pools or using friends to help you kind of develop your small mining project. But that's like, I don't know if that's what you've seen in your meetup, but that's what I remember and what I still hear about from other meetups. And I'm sure you have miners at your meetup. Maybe this is something that they're gravitating towards, and maybe you can tell us some stories about that.
Yeah, what I find fascinating about mining is that, a lot of this, not everyone's technically minded or really is interested in understanding, digital forms of things. Even though we don't use paper so much, a lot of times we use PDFs and email and things like that. So we're becoming an increasingly digitized world, but we're still physical beings who need to exist in the physical world, right? What I love about mining is that it ties these two things together. It takes this digital asset and makes it physical, or at least ties it to the physical world. So you're constrained by real world physics. And that's the engineer in me, just that my actions, right? And so you can keep this kind of digital. Yeah, you're going to use a lot of power, but you're going to be able to mine Bitcoin and be able to grab some Bitcoin as it's being issued by participating in mining. But what a lot of our members are doing, and what I'm seeing a lot of people doing all over the world, is, hey, there's another byproduct to doing this. If I'm using a lot of actual energy, these things kick out a lot of heat, for example. Why not make these things as efficient as possible and repurpose that heat in all of these interesting ways? So one guy who was at the very first meetup that we had, or second, but met him, and he was obsessed with mining. I'll say his name. His name's Chet. You might have heard of him, might have seen him at conferences or whatever. Dude's awesome, big beard, obsessed with mining. It became so obsessed that he ended up finally managing a mine permanently. Now he lives there, and I don't think he'd mind me saying any of this. He calls himself a Bitcoin disciple, and where he's just like he really lives this whole lifestyle out. And so one thing he did a while back was he bought a whole pallet of S9s. I think some of them broke and some of them worked okay, but just old miners that not a lot of mining companies are interested in utilizing in any way. And he was the first person to kind of these aren't trash. They're way less efficient products that's coming out, but they still be utilized. And so he repaired a bunch of these, and he sold some, but he mostly gave like a lot of them away for anyone who was interested in just getting their hands dirty and starting to understand mining. And so he would message our group and just be like, anyone interested in a miner, and a couple people would play around with it, and once winter started coming, Michigan's can get a bit cold. We all have to turn on our heat for several months. We're like, let's just at least throw this on and keep our house temperature at a certain rate, and we can actually lower our nat gas cost or electricity cost in that way, because it's not being used to actually heat the home. You're supplementing it with a miner. And that's the first and obvious application that I started seeing. But then people started playing around with it in a bunch of different ways, like connecting it to their water system. So they had hot water heating their pools with it. And then it was, I don't know when I met Carl. I don't know if any of you guys know Carl. He's a big permaculture guy. Comes to a lot of our meetups. And we're really into homesteading and permaculture and living off the land as much as we can. I've learned a lot from him, but he's also a mining guy, and he's really tried to take as many different applications to repurpose heat as he can, and he's done it in incredible ways in a bunch of interesting things. It's just been fascinating to watch him. There's obviously the heating of your home aspect. He's dried fruits and food with his miner, created dehydrators. He's taken his Airbnb that has like an outhouse by it and extracted the fumes out of the outhouse with the miner as well. We have sheep that we've actually bought from him, and we have our own flock, but he's kind of helped us show us how to care for these sheep and to take care of them. And during the lambing process, one year he had a very small lamb that almost wasn't going to make it, and he repurposed one of his greenhouses or something like that, and started pumping the miner in there and created this incubator to help this lamb actually grow to be able to be off on his own and develop fully. And he saved this lamb with a miner. And the last project that I saw him do was he took the hash boards out of a bunch of miners, bought a bunch of canola oil, and put it as a heat exchanger in there to dehydrate like his maple syrup. I don't know exactly, now I'm thinking about it, how he did it, but he created maple syrup with a bunch of torn apart S9 hash boards in canola oil. And it's like, yeah, that's not gonna last forever, but it at least helps him get through that project. And at the same time, he's not wasting all of this energy. He's repurposing that and earning Bitcoin through that. So it's this fascinating aspect of actually making all of your energy usage as efficient as possible. And I think that's an aspect that Bitcoin is really teaching us is, a lot of people think of, especially mining, as being very wasteful. To me, from how I understand it, it's the most efficient form of energy or application that works with energy to waste the least amount as possible. Be curious your guys' thought on that.
Yeah, I mean I'm fascinated by all of these applications for heat reuse that people discover for themselves, and then they just mention them in their communities. And you know, a handful of other people will hear that and be like, well, I know exactly how to do that. I'd never thought of that. And now that that's planted a seed in my mind, I know exactly what to do. And I can do the same thing and make, and that's how these ideas proliferate. And I think, permaculture and Bitcoin, mentality of Bitcoiners or something, they're very similar, right? They're taking something that is kind of rooted in successful methods in the past, homesteading and living off the land, and that rugged individualism, but with a modern scientific bent to it, where you're innovating and you're trying to make the different aspects of farming, homesteading, and so on more sustainable and more integrated, so that each thing kind of offsets the other thing. And there's many ways that permaculture farmers, homesteaders do this. And of course, we see this in Bitcoin mining for sure as well, but even in just the way people try to integrate Bitcoin into their lives or into their other businesses that aren't Bitcoin related. um, I think I'd never heard about dehydrating fruit with the heat from miners, but that makes perfect sense to me.
Or pumping out your outhouse with the miner. To me, that's like, okay, awesome. You just did that, and you saved sheep as well. Like, you saved a lamb, like that. It's incredible. I have this take that and whether it's been a systematic attack or whether it's just based on big farming, big medicine, big government, whatever you want to call it, I really think that like the personal values, the personal virtues of people have been dismantled and attacked. And what we're seeing through permaculture, what we're seeing through heat reuse, through sustainable living, is we're bringing that back. We're bringing back human values, family values, and the nuclear family, those kinds of things. And it really gives me that hope for the future. Like, I have this dream where I can just live out on a farm with, my family. Maybe it's a big family, maybe it's a little family, but where I'm using the heat from these miners to do things that raise my standard of living, but don't simultaneously raise the cost of living, which allows me to live a more comfortable life and not feel oppressed by whoever it might be, whether it's the state or, my fellow man. And I think that, those examples that you're giving just go to show that with a little bit of ingenuity, with a little bit of like taking personal responsibility, the life that we want to live is completely possible, and we'll take it into our own hands. And maybe you don't know everything. Maybe you don't understand how these systems work, because you're an engineer. I'm not an engineer. So I might not understand exactly how it works, but I know that it can be done. So why don't I just, connect with you in these, greater Bitcoin communities and say like, hey, like, let's work together to build this system so that we can all live better lives. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, I think the value aspect is important here, where Bitcoiners understand where the true value is. Like you mentioned, like investing in something, like let's say you're going to buy a brand new, I don't know, the Lamborghini example is a funny one with Bitcoiners, because we're like the last person who would ever buy a Lamborghini. Like the only time we would buy a Lamborghini is if we literally had hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin or whatever, where a Lamborghini isn't going to cost us really anything. But we understand where value needs to be, and we just have a deeper sense of value, right? So it's more valuable for us to invest in something that is long term and not something that's going to depreciate and has the appearance of value. Like the poorest people I know are the ones who buy like the latest and greatest clothes, and the richest people I know, like they don't do that because they understand where true value lies, right? And I think you're right. I think our community realizes that they value relationships, they value community, they value local businesses, and they want to support those things. They have no problem spending their Bitcoin when it's helping out their local community. You know, they don't even they don't want to give them dollars even. You know, they're like, I really want to bless you with this, so I'm going to give you something that's more valuable. It may be at this time worth the same amount in dollars, but the fact that I'm giving it to you in Bitcoin, it just means so much more, because this is like an actual value exchange. You're going to give me this service, and I'm going to give you this valuable resource. And it just creates a better society that way, where it's not just this, it's not a cheap transaction or a valueless transaction or shallow transaction. It's a meaningful transaction. And you only want to do that, like, you want to be intentional about that. I think where we find ourselves in society is people are doing these shallow transactions constantly, where it's just playing this game of, you know, cat and mouse, and we wonder why we're so unfulfilled in our lives. But I think Bitcoiners have so much hope, because there is everything that they do. Sorry, it looked like it lost for a second, but
just a second. You're good.
Are you
Everything
back?
they do.
Yeah, feel free to pick up where you left off. We'll have editors take care of that.
okay. Yeah, I just think the perspective on value, that people like us kind of understand it, I think that's has a deeper implication on society than a lot of times that we realize.
Yeah, critics of Bitcoin and Bitcoiners like to point out the greed or selfishness, or, you know, they're never going to spend it. They're just hoarding it. It's so selfish, that kind of thing. But it couldn't be farther from the truth. Like you said, there's a huge amount of generosity around the Bitcoin community, and evangelists, activists, educators, whatever you want to call them, all the above, they spent a lot of Bitcoin giving it away and sharing it with the world. And of course, even aside from the evangelism side of things, as you accumulate Bitcoin and time goes by and the value of it goes up, and you realize, I was really able to not only preserve my purchasing power, but gain a great amount of purchasing power that I can use for myself, my family, my livelihood. And now it's very worthwhile. I mean, we all have to live. So it's worthwhile for folks to take some of the Bitcoin savings that they've accumulated and use it to improve their quality of life, maybe buy a new home, maybe buy land and start homesteading, and start a small permaculture farm, and things like that. And or invest into their local communities. You know, I know Bitcoiners who they live a nomadic lifestyle, kind of like you did, and then they find themselves in a place where they can give back, and they'll be in Africa and they're building schools. You know, and I know plenty of people in my network who have done that. You know, probably a dozen at least that I could name, who have built schools or built freshwater wells, or all sorts of things that improve local communities that they've given back to because of their, you know, the wealth that they were able to preserve from saving and accumulating Bitcoin. And it makes the world a better place. And so there's a ton of value there in spending your Bitcoin on things like that, improving it for yourself and your family, or improving local communities, or even perfect strangers who you can tell need that support, and they need a little more investment in the development of their, you know, public services, utilities, um, you know, uh, just bringing the resources that are available there to the market, or to the people in the community, like fresh water, for example. And so there is a huge amount of generosity in Bitcoin. And if you participate in a meetup, even go to one meetup, you'll notice this. You'll, you know, if you're skeptical, go to a Bitcoin meetup. You might still be skeptical afterwards, but you'll have this renewed sense of a different view than you might have had with the preconceived notions going into that visit or that event about Bitcoiners. Your mind will be changed, you know, either greatly or slowly. And I love seeing that transformation. As a meetup organizer in the past, it was really so fulfilling to just see that take place.
I want to take it kind of back a little bit now that we're back on the subject of Bitcoin meetups and stuff like that. So you both have, done meetups, you've both organized meetups and got them going and off the ground. So as someone, I live in a small community of very old, people who really don't give two shits about Bitcoin because, they've made their wealth, they've, done the thing. But I do see a new generation forming where they're lost. They don't know how to carry themselves in the world. So how would people in my situation, start trying to think of gaining traction for a Bitcoin meetup? Because I've tried in my town and I really haven't gotten too much traction, and maybe I'm just not doing the right things. But we talk about how if you don't understand something and you want to get other people on board to help you understand their side of things, because we all come from different spaces, like how do I gain more traction? How do I get more people in my town to come to these events so that we can start talking about Bitcoin and we can start thinking about more sustainable living?
I think you should take that one, Jack, because you have more recent experience.
Well, it's funny, like, we get people of all different types, different ages, technically minded and not technically minded. And what I have found to be helpful is we segregate different meetups for different purposes. So we always try to have a certain theme. Quarterly, we make sure that we do what we call our 101 events, and we just leave it to the basics. Sometimes that's a presentation, like a basic presentation. What is Bitcoin? What is money type of thing. Other times it's just, hey, we're going to be intentional about us having a conversation where if the conversation starts to lead toward, UTXO management, for example, like maybe we pull it back just to be accommodating for people and encourage, hey, our next Bitcoin 101 event is coming up. Bring your family members, bring your friends who are interested in Bitcoin, but a little bit more intimidated on the technical side. And just being aware of that. And so you kind of leave these opportunities to meet different folks where they're at. I think a lot of the responsibility isn't necessarily should be placed on the individuals who are trying to interact with Bitcoin. Bitcoin's for the sovereign individual, people who want to take that responsibility in their own hands. So with that comes a decent amount of work and education, and you're not going to be handed this thing for free. That being said, I think we've got a long way to go in Bitcoin, and I think design is a key aspect to this. So the type of engineer I am is a product design engineer. So I have to think about the end user experience quite often. And you can create a system that works and everything, but only a certain individual who's qualified and certified in networking or whatever it is able to actually operate the system because they have the training and experience. That's kind of where Bitcoin is at right now. Only certain types of individuals can really interact with it to make it useful. We've got a long ways to go, I think, and I want us to collectively focus a lot more on design so that the end user can just kind of pick this thing up and it works like Cash App. It works like Venmo, and they don't have to think too much about it. There are trade-offs to that. Sometimes they might be custodial trade-offs or, a fee structure or a centralization aspect of some kind. That I think that's okay as long as, we try to move into the right direction where that is a more sovereign piece and a less controlled or manipulated system than like the current fiat system. And that's a low bar to, I think, to make anything better than the current fiat system that we're in. But, throwing something, I've even thrown up like an easy wallet to use like on my parents' phone, like Moon, like you can say what you want about Moon and custodial things and how it integrates with Lightning, but there's even that is just a little bit too much for their minds to kind of adjust to, where they're like, the seed phrase that I have to remember is a bit weird, can I, they want everything kind of just done for them. And some of that aspect, like I said, should fall on the individual to want to take on that responsibility. But I think, yeah, I'm repeating myself. I think we've got a long way to go in having that design mentality where we make these things a lot easier whilst trying to sacrifice this little amount of the privacy, custodial, and sovereignty aspects that come with that.
Yeah, there's two reasons I've noticed over the years why people take the full plunge to, take on the responsibility of learning what they need to learn so that they can, be sovereign with how they use Bitcoin, so that they can self-custody, so, they can understand how to manage, secrets like seed phrases, passwords, and so on. And the two reasons are they are in pain, and so they're compelled to learn that. And that's kind of the whole, like, they're in pain because, oh man, the bank is discriminating against me for silly reasons, or they shut me down, or they blocked me too much, or or the regime I live under is oppressive to me in various ways, where it's causing me struggle, pain, hardship, and I see Bitcoin as a way out potentially, but it's got this heavy lifting for me as an individual to get to the point where I can use it to kind of free myself and liberate myself from those hardships. So that's the one motivation that people will have to fully take on Bitcoin is through pain. And the other is more fun for sure. And it's because it's cool and new. And so people will be super motivated to learn those things they need to learn, gain those skills to adopt it because it's the cool new tech, because it's, very interesting and fun for them. And so either you're in pain or you think it's cool. And that's why people kind of take the plunge ultimately, that I've noticed over the years. And for some people who aren't, maybe they're not sure that it's super cool yet, or they haven't been bitten by that cool bug too much, or they have had a pretty comfortable experience where they live or with their financial relationships with different institutions, and they just haven't encountered that pain. They haven't felt discriminated against by banks or financial institutions. And so, that time will come, one or the other. Either it'll become fashionable and they'll want it, or they'll be in hardship and they'll need it.
I think one other aspect to that is we have a responsibility as community facilitators, organizers, what have you. I think the future is going to look like, I don't want to say we're the banks type of thing, but we, a lot of us Bitcoiners are holding on to more funds than just our own. Close family members or children of ours, like we'll have separate accounts or separate wallets set up for them, and we're that custodial enterprise that is holding on to that for them. And I think that's going to expand out. It's one thing I'm excited about with like Fediment, for example, and Xiaomi Cash. And I think things like Fedimints are going to be established on the community level, where our local Grand Rapids or Greater Michigan community will likely have a Fediment where we have these trusted individuals. We don't have whoever's at Chase or Wells Fargo, who we definitely don't trust and don't know all the members of. We don't have to trust in them just because they haven't lost our money completely on average over a long period of time. We know that Jack, Will, Trevor has our Bitcoin in this Fediment, and I actually trust them. They've talked about this a lot. They've been running that community. They've been in it since however long. And I think those custodial solutions aren't bad because they're on the more localized level. And I think that's where a lot of these people, where it's like, hey, I'm not going to run my own node. I'm struggling already with maintaining the seed phrase and keeping that secret. You do it for me and just help set me up with an easy in and out so that I can use Bitcoin, but you take on the responsibility of a bit more custody.
Yeah, that's how we change the world, you know. Like it starts on a small community level. It's not, oh, we need to change the state, we need to change the government, the two-party system's not working. It's no, like you change yourself, and then you change your community, and you do it by example. It's the same way you raise kids, you know. And so I love the way that you put that. I want to ask you a couple of questions, and these are kind of like off the cuff. Just give us what your answer is. This one is specifically tailored to you, and I think that we'll get a good answer from this. So, is Bitcoin a gift from God?
You made it sound like that was going to be like a quick answer type of thing that I could just shoot something right back at you. We could spend the rest of our lives discussing that, I suppose. I think everything's a gift from God. You know, is this a godly thing? Does this bring us closer to the kingdom of heaven, if you will? Does this help our fellow man? Does Bitcoin offer us a way to be a servant to others and lift people up? And I think, yeah, you know, it's a bit weird, I think, to call, you know, a technology, literal code, something like that. Just because there's a separation between, you know, spiritual, physical, digital, mental. You know, we tend to segregate these things, but you know, they're all intertwined. They're all working together, and I think if something is to bring about good rather than destruction and chaos, then yeah, it's naturally a gift from God. I think a lot of Bitcoiners and people in the Bitcoin community aren't being careful enough to. I think they're replacing Bitcoin with God and with their religion. I think that's a mistake. I like to give the analogy of Bitcoin isn't God. Bitcoin is the ark. You know, God told us to build the ark. God told us to, that has said, hey, the world is failing. The world is being destroyed. Here's something you can do. You got to put in the work, but you can save this. You can save your family, and here's this lifeboat. But you've got to put in the work to do it, and I'm going to guide you to do that.
And as you're putting in the work, everyone around you is going to call you crazy.
Up until the floods come, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to have that future faith, right? And I think, you know, you start to you have to have that faith that that's how it's going to play out. There's another point I was going to make, but blanking on it. I just think that people will they'll replace God or religion with that, and Bitcoin can go away tomorrow, and we could have a whole doomer society where just everything has gone by the wayside, and the world is just terrible. You know, and this has happened time and time in history. So if you've read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, the whole thing is that logotherapy that he has discovered, where he was in the most disparaging, awful situation, where he was in the Nazi concentration camps. And what he discovered is that even there, you can't take that away from me. You can't take my soul, my faith, my God away from me. I can still maintain that even in a horrible place. And so we could live in a future fiat society where we're all controlled, we're all enslaved, and everything's horrible, and we're being fed pharmaceuticals and terrible food. And we can continue down that path. Bitcoin, I like to say, is inevitable, because I do think it's going to play out in a lot of ways, and saving us in a lot of ways, and fix a lot of things. But it's not inevitable. This could not work out. Some things can happen. Society can be overtaken just by a certain collective society, a collective mentality where we just choose to not go that way, and we choose comfort over sovereignty. It's not inevitable, but I think having that relationship with God and understanding that, and having that faith that your life is beyond this humanistic version that you're experiencing here, I think is important, and that's why I think
it's really amazing. Yeah, I have a little story to share, I guess, about that. It's just amazing what human beings are capable of enduring when they have a higher purpose, or when they're seeking, trying to, for lack of a better term, create heaven on earth. They're aspiring to that. So I was just scrolling Twitter this morning, and I came across this really cool story. And your story just now, the answer to this question made me think of it again. And basically, it's about these two Tibetan men who were in search of nirvana, and they were trying to get to, I think, a monastery, in some far-flung place from where they're originally from in Tibet. And so they go on a pilgrimage. They're walking through the wilderness, and this is during World War II. So they get sidetracked. They find their way into, like, I guess, southeastern China. They get kidnapped. They get put to they get sent into Russia, and then they get kidnapped in Russia, and they get put on the front lines of battle there. And somehow they get captured by Germans, and they are sent to a concentration camp. And so they're enduring the concentration camp, doing the labor there, and they're still trying to go on their pilgrimage. And so they have this incredible saga, somehow surviving all of these different prisoner of war episodes on their journey amongst all these different competing factions and armies. And so later, the war's over, they're discovered, and they're being interviewed. And the interviewer's trying to figure out, how did they survive each of these things? How on earth could they have survived being prisoners of war multiple times for multiple hostile regimes in these horrible conditions? And finally, it occurs to the interviewer that maybe they believed they were dead. And so he starts asking them about that. And they start telling him, confirming that, basically, that they believed that they were in the netherworld, or, in their philosophy, in their kind of cosmology, they were dead. And so they were wondering why they still needed to eat and sleep and so on, even though they were thinking that they were dead the whole time. But they just thought it was like part of their journey, and maybe they'd reach nirvana at the end. So they were consigned to this struggle because of the end result they were seeking, because of the place they were trying to arrive at. And so it was just this fascinating story, that the reason they probably survived all of this incredible hardship is because they stopped feeling physical as much, and they were on a spiritual quest. And so that's how they were somehow energetically, spiritually, whatever, able to navigate this thing. And so yeah, just to kind of tie it back to your answer a little bit, they had surrendered, I guess, themselves to their beliefs and this ultimate salvation, if you will, in their worldview. And that's how they survived and got through it all, and had this incredible story, and were not traumatized by it. Like, the interviewers were marveled at how they did not have incredible PTSD and trauma from their experience. And it's because they were so devoted to this journey that they were on.
I think there's a lot of I think that's why we see so much lack of meaning and so much despair in, I think, at all generations. We often say the younger generations, but we've kind of done away with this idea of God, because we've conflated it with traditional cult-like religion. And that is a way to think about it that we should move past. You don't just do these things because we've always done these things, and you say these things because it's in the scripture, because we're supposed to say it. Like, there's a much deeper ingrained truth into having the spiritual aspect of life. For some reason, we think that we're so great, that we've achieved so much, that science has solved so many answers, that we can do away with God and we are above him at this point. But this isn't the first time that humanity has experienced this. It happens over and over and over. And that's what the Tower of Babel story is about. It's trying to reach up to that kingdom of heaven, saying that we can build this tower and we can actually meet God. And God continues to humble you and continues to have that society collapse and people speak different languages and not understand what each other is saying. And it's just one of those repetitive stories that happens over and over and over again. But you're only going to learn that lesson by actually experiencing it. And there's truth that can help you navigate through these turning times, through these shifts in society and these rebirths and collapses. And that's what I think the Bible is for. It's telling you how to navigate through this. That's why the Word of God is this book of instruction and this guiding light to help you through your life, because you're going to run into these situations. Society is going to attempt to do this just to learn that it's a mistake and you're going to fail, and there's something a bit more foundational that you should be seeking rather than these earthly pleasures and earthly dopamine kicks. And I just think there's so many parallels that we're experiencing right now that is really forcing us to turn back to God, because we've been so ripped away. And I know that we've taken a big turn away from Bitcoin for like a lot of people may be thinking this, but Bitcoiners don't think on the shallow surface, do we? We like to get in deep.
Before Trevor asks his next question, I have a quick one. I think, in your meetups, do these topics of discussion ever come up with the members of your meetup? When you're all meeting, during any of your events, do you guys ever delve into the spiritual aspects and how Bitcoin might teach us about it, or be a tool for spiritual discovery or ascension? Or does that come up in meetups?
Yeah, I mean, I know I do, and my wife does, and a couple other members who are interested in that. And I think I'm much more comfortable to bring that up to even a new member who I might not know so well than I am to bring that up to a coworker at work, for example, or a stranger on the street, because this kind of is very uncomfortable for them. They're like, no, please just talk to me about the weather, about the sports game that happened last night. Like that's my comfort zone. Let's leave it there. But a Bitcoiner would be the type to appreciate and be like super thrilled. Hey, we're getting in deep, and let's actually talk about something that is actually going to be of significant meaning in their life. Like we're not wasting time talking about the football game that happened last night. It's not getting us anywhere. No one cares. It's not bringing the world anywhere. But these type of conversations, I'm hoping that this podcast and all of that, this is what is triggering something in someone to change their life or have a different perspective. Otherwise, why are we wasting time on a Saturday talking about this, right? Like we all decided to get here because there's something meaningful to talk about. And that brings us together. And I think that's why the diehards and a lot of the members of our community come every month or every 2 weeks. It's because it's that value that we talked about earlier. It's worth it to them. It's worth it to them to trade their scarce resource of time for something meaningful to bring the world forward.
Yeah, it goes back to time preference. It goes back to values. It all kind of circles back in on itself, and Bitcoiners are perfectly okay with asking the hard questions and having the hard conversations. And normies, they don't like to do that. Like you said, they want to talk about the weather. They want to talk about the football game. And I could give two shits less about the football game. I want to know about your opinions on God. I want to know what your spirituality is. I want to know how we fix the world. And like we've kind of talked about in this episode today, is we fix the world by starting with ourselves and our community. So
yeah. And I think Trevor, before you ask your next question, I think the thing that, wakes people up to the potentially spiritual nature of Bitcoin, if you will, is that realignment of time preference, these, the game theory of Bitcoin itself, as you understand, like, can it survive? And this might be how. It awakens virtues. People are reminded of virtues. And, in the modern world, there's all these questions about, is this a virtue? Is that a virtue? Is there anything that's really a virtue? Is everything relativistic? And, that's kind of the ocean that we're swimming in our modern world. And then Bitcoin comes along and you realize, wow, there's these real anchored truths going on with how the system is designed and how it behaves with us and how we behave with it. And true virtues emerge, and you're reminded, like, wow, these are virtues. Save the ability to have a savings tool that allows me to project my planning thoughts into the future much farther ahead than just my next meal or my next month. That allows me to be more virtuous and live out true virtues. And then so you're kind of reminded of that, and then it resembles things you may have learned or heard about, regardless of how much exposure you may have had in your background or upbringing to any given religion. You've had some, to some degree, pretty much everybody has. And then these virtues that you start to circulate around that Bitcoin reminds you about also kind of harken back to some of these traditions and faiths and religions and what they taught. And then you can't avoid the similarities there. And I think that's why people go into these discussions, and it's not a complete tangent and it's not unrelated, even though some people, when maybe this topic comes up in a meetup, they might roll their eyes. They'll probably still listen though. And then it'll operate on them. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. I think Bitcoin reminds us of virtues, and then we are reminded then that virtues are real, and this is what those faiths and traditions we're talking about, that I may have never practiced in my life, but I heard about, and now I'm practicing, becoming a Bitcoiner, and it's bringing it to my life.
That's a great point. I think you're right.
Yeah, that was awesome, Will, and I'm glad you interjected there. Seriously. So my last question for you is, we ask this for everyone, is what does Bitcoin mean to you?
Everyone says like Bitcoin is hope, and I think that's directionally correct. But it's just another tool that can bring us closer to the world that I think everyone wants to see. How we get there, we might argue what is right and what is wrong. But I think in general, we all want to see the world become a better place. And to me, as I mentioned at the beginning, being engineer-minded, understanding how effective systems operate and how wasteful and ineffective systems don't bring you to where you want as well or with as high quality. Bitcoin's not perfect. It's got a ways to go, but boy, if you look at other systems and how they operate, and you were to pick off of the shelf, which is the best performing system that you can place value on, that a system of value transfer, money is this foundation that we build our society upon. Bitcoin blows all other conceived ideas out of the water. Like previously gold might have been the best because of its scarcity and but its transferability, and to apply that into the modern digital age, it just doesn't make sense. And we could argue for a long time about how corrupt and dumb and wasteful fiat systems are, and so basically, just from an engineer perspective, it's, you don't need to go deeper than that. It's a system that works. It's a system that works well, that's reliable, and it's a dumb system in a sense where it can be complex, but if you're going to have a system that you need to rely on, to count on, that's going to keep producing block after block after block, you need that reliability has to be sound. And that's why all these other cryptos don't work, because they're no different than the other fiat systems that we're trying to get away from. You can actually rely on Bitcoin because it functions, because it's simple, and it's difficult to change. And that's what makes it an actual commodity. You can't sanction Russia from using it, just like you can't sanction Russia from using gold. Everyone has the ability to use it in the exact same way. And so in that way, it is hopeful, but just from a technically engineering perspective, simply a system that works, and it works well, and it works better than any system we've ever created.
I love that answer. That was perfectly explained, and I like how you kind of started off with everybody says Bitcoin is hope, and that's honestly what I think Bitcoin is. But I love your answer. It's a dumb system that works, that just does what it's supposed to do, and that's why you see all these other smart systems failing, because they're trying to do too many things. So that was awesome, dude. Thank you so much.
I appreciate your time today, guys. No, this was an awesome conversation. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. So before we close it out, I want to, as an appreciation for your time here today, we're going to give you 2 free tickets to our mining conference in September 27th through the 29th. It's in Brainerd, Minnesota. Really fun event. We're really excited for it. There's lots to do in a beautiful scenery, backwoods of Minnesota. And if you have an opportunity to come, like, you're gonna have a great time. We'd love to meet you. We'd love to, have a in-person conversation with you and see how you're doing. If you can't come, what we would like is for you to, give the tickets away at one of your meetups to some people who would like to go, and just, try to bring the community out and really have a good time in Brainerd.
Sounds awesome. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Try to make it
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So afterwards, I'll make sure you get all those information. So one last thing, just tell the people where they can find you if they wanted to talk with you more about, your background, or if you wanted to. You don't have to, but just point the plebs to where they can go.
Well, if you're in the local area, I'd say come to a meetup. Come to one of the several Michigan meetups if you're around in the Midwest or in Michigan. We have an event on August 10, the Lake Satoshi retreat. We all get together in Lansburg, Michigan, just above Lansing, and it's around a lake, small lake, and we have presentations. We have a little bit of a farmers market, arts market, and it's just an entire weekend to go camping and hang out with Bitcoiners for the weekend. It's like, people who go to conferences, like, those are okay. This is the best one to go to by far, I think, other than the mining conference coming up in September. But go to both of those. You should be able to find me there or at many of the local meetups. Online presence, I don't want to really support Twitter. Find me on Master, Jackie Hoddle, and appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll make sure that your NPub gets shared in the description of this video. And if you share with me the link to your event, I can make sure that gets in there as well. So we'll make sure that everybody can find you. Guys, thank you for this episode. Thank you for tuning in. If you guys liked it, if you guys want to help support us, please like, follow, subscribe, and please hit us up on I totally just blanked on the name. Value for value sharing, guys. Hit us up over there. Fountain, please hit us up. Yes, thank you. I was blanking for some reason. I was so enthralled in our conversation. Hit us up on Fountain. We wanna support the value for value community built on Bitcoin. So with that, guys, this was the Build a Mine podcast. Thank you guys for being here. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Jack.
Please note, the Build a Mine podcast provides information for general educational purposes only. This information should not be construed as legal, financial, or investment advice. We do not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information presented, and we encourage you to consult with a professional advisor, legal advisor, and/or financial advisor before making any financial decisions. The Build a Mine podcast and its affiliates are not responsible for any losses incurred as a result of using the information provided.